welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. It's the 15th of February, and we've got a lot of big news this week. We're going to devote most of the second half of the program to the unexpected resignation of Pope Benedict the 16th, and treat that as a kind of barometer of the crisis of European civilization and indeed world civilization in our time, an event which has not occurred for 600 years. The previous one is actually 100 years before, 150 years before that. So in the last 800 years, this has happened twice. So it's an indication of a severe crisis, not just in the church, not just in Italy, not just in Europe, but in the world, as we'll try to show. That will be our second hour. Then we also want to point to the Wall Street sales tax. We've got very encouraging news this week on the Wall Street sales tax. The momentum is building, and I want to urge people right at the beginning, do what you can to popularize and make prominent the issue of the Wall Street sales tax. And above all, do not allow yourself to be led into the fool's errand and the wedge issue land of gun control, either pro or con. Both are useless and stupid. And if you spend your time on this, you will get absolutely no return. You'll either become a dupe of the NRA or a dupe of Obama, and that is simply unacceptable. So then we've also got to look at the Obama State of the Union, which is in some ways, there are some positive things in there, but I'm afraid the general logic of it is treachery. And indeed, the positive things seem to be kind of features of a strategy of treachery and dissembling, which is what we've always objected to, among other things, with Obama, right, to do crimes under left cover. But now let's look at the Wall Street sales tax. This is truly the idea whose time has come. And this week we've got two think tanks. These, I would call them think tanks of the middle rank here in Washington, that have come out for the Wall Street sales tax. Now, let me be specific here. They're coming out for the Wall Street sales tax by name. They call it the Wall Street sales tax, but unfortunately, they don't have the full power of the actual Wall Street sales tax. In other words, what they're calling the Wall Street sales tax, and that is progress by itself, are the bills, the Harkin DeFazio bill, and I guess the promised Bernie Sanders bill that are now imminent, right? That are either under consideration. But this is still important because it shows the growth and the momentum of the idea. The first one is the Center for Effective Government. And the Center for Effective Government is, again, a think tank of the middle rank. It is one that has been around for about 30 years, and essentially they are the former OMB watch. So they're concerned with issues of budget and the anti-austerity in general, and they have a nice article posted February 8th, the Wall Street sales tax. As policymakers in Washington, D.C. continue to debate our nation's budget priorities, some of the options currently being considered are cuts in Social Security benefits, education and health programs, important investments in transportation infrastructure and health research, anti-poverty programs, among others. So the last major deal did raise taxes, but there is a better and more progressive way than these cuts to address our long-term budget deficits than cutting important programs like Social Security, education, and health research, enacting a Wall Street sales tax. And there it is, ipsissima verba. That's it, in clear text. Wall Street sales tax, known as the financial transaction tax. And they have a fact sheet about that. So that is, that's great. That's progress. And again, the thing is now we've got a pattern in the world of these think tanks. Let me just say in passing, we've had in the past month or two, the Daily Kos had an article by a guy from Occupy Wall Street supporting what he demands, the Wall Street sales tax, and talks about hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. Same thing at Fire Dog Lake in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Wall Street sales tax, similar or identical article. We've got Krugman calling for the transaction tax or Wall Street sales tax. So we've got them, and then we've got a guy called Dean Baker. And let me see if I can find Dean Baker. Dean Baker is from yet another of these Washington think tanks. Again, it's not the Brookings Institution. It's not the Center for American Progress yet. But mentioning these, I'm calling your attention to the task now, which is it's time to enlighten and illuminate the Brookings Institution, the Center for American Progress, right? That's the Clintonista one. Brookings been here for a long time. Brookings has actually migrated sort of to the center and perhaps right of center. But the other one is Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. And he did his in the form of an article on the Huffington Post. So we've got Fire Dog Lake, Daily Kos, Huffington Post, a hat trick, 3 scores here going. Dean Baker, fairly well-known guy, actually quite well-known, despite the fact that this is not one of the biggest of the think tanks. He personally, I think, is fairly well-known, and he calls for the Wall Street sales tax. So you get the idea. Again, I urge people in an exciting moment like this, we tried very hard, naturally, to get Obama to say Wall Street sales tax in the State of the Union. Now, of course, this is not easy because, and he didn't say it, because Obama's entire career is to protect Wall Street from the economic justice demands, right? He wants to maintain Wall Street more or less untouched, right? That's been his entire thing. So Dean Baker is the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He's the author of The End of Loser Liberalism, Making Markets Progressive. And the article is called Fix the Debt and a Wall Street Sales Tax. And this is interesting, of course. Fix the Debt is this group of predatory corporate executives who wanted to parade themselves as depositories of civic virtue at the same time that they were pleading so that other people would be taxed, not them, right? They want your entitlements cut. They want to gouge your pension. They want to gouge your Medicare, and they don't want to pay their fair share, right? Many of these are zombie bankers like Blankfein who pay nothing, or indeed Immelt of General Motors, General Electric, which is a hedge fund, who also pays nothing. So here we go. The Fix the Debt people don't talk about a Wall Street sales tax, writes Dean Baker. Quote, this omission is striking because so many others in budget debates in the United States are suggesting such a tax. There's a long list of highly respected economists who have advocated such taxes, starting with Maynard Keynes, including Nobel Prize winners, including Tobin, many papers about this, Get Money, and suppress speculative trading. So the hour of the Wall Street sales tax is here. Mobilize. Don't be distracted. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, the 15th of February here in Washington, D.C. We're just concluding the week of the State of the Union and the various replies. Just a couple of other interesting quotes from this Dean Baker article from Huffington Post. dated the 12th of February, Lincoln's birthday, and the day of, I guess that's the day of the Obama State of the Union address. He is asking why we don't hear from the media and the Simpson-Bowles Commission, the Cat Food Commission. How come they didn't include the Wall Street sales tax before killing old people and before depriving young kids of S-chip, healthcare, and WIC? How come they didn't think about dunning Wall Street and making them pay something, right, on their turnover, since they pay nothing, not even a corporate income tax? He says, well, another possibility why they didn't talk about it, many of the debt fixers, such as Morgan Stanley director Erskine Bowles and Peter Peterson, I would add, of Lehman Brothers, he was the head of Lehman Brothers, the master debt fixer himself, have long-standing ties to the financial industry. They are the financial industry. They are Wall Street speaking tubes. They may not be interested in a financial speculation tax for the simple reason that it could eat into their bread and butter. We should no more expect the debt fixers to support an FST than we would expect a farmers' lobby to support an end to farm subsidies. Anyway, you get the idea. This seems to be the most credible explanation. So again, don't listen to any of those hypocrites and fakers from these companies and fix the debt when they're parading their rigor and how they're going to make the hard choices, and the widows and orphans and sick people and old people will pay for this, right? Remember that Simpson and Bowles, the correct answer for Simpson and Bowles is send them to Nuremberg to answer for what they've been doing, because they are at least advocating things that violate the question of the high crimes against humanity as elaborated by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union in 1945. So look at all this momentum on the Wall Street sales tax. We also had Ed Schultz, interestingly enough. Ed Schultz had this on his television program. I think it was the night before or shortly before the State of the Union, where he included I think he called it a Wall Street transaction tax, and that was included in a series of things that ought to be proposed. So this is now all over the place. Also, we want, if you have a way to communicate to Bernie Sanders needs to know that people are waiting. He's promised this bill. Where is the bill? Do we have the bill? And indeed, the same thing for Harkin. If Harkin is quitting, he should use his remaining time in office, which is a couple of years, to do something on this front. Same thing for DeFazio. Same thing for all the rest of them. And Kucinich, if Kucinich is getting on Fox News now as a commentator, why don't we hear from him about the Wall Street sales tax? Did he believe in it, or did he just believe in some form of generic leftism, which gets us nowhere? Now, that's more or less the Wall Street sales tax story. And, of course, the downside of all this is that Obama did not mention it in the State of the Union. I must also say I took what I thought was a fairly careful look at the House Progressive Caucus answer to the austerity ghouls, which is fairly detailed, and they have things in there which are fine. Let Medicare Part D haggle with Big Pharma and drive the prices down in the same way that the Veterans Administration can. I think they probably have a couple of other things that are worthy of support. But I looked hard, and I could not find the Wall Street sales tax, the transaction tax, the trading tax, the Tobin tax, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's unfortunate. And I would ask then Congressman Keith Ellison of Minnesota, right, who is very much on record in favor of the Wall Street sales tax, how come the Progressive Caucus didn't reiterate this and include that in the list with an estimate of how much money they think we could get out of it, because they have some staffs, right? They can even call on independent agencies, even the Federal Reserve, to come forward with such estimates. But we didn't get that. So with the big institutions on the Democratic Party side, we're still suffering from a deficit. So I urge everybody out there, search your creativity, search your conscience. Are there ways that you can actually move some of these institutions? Because this is what we need. Now, what Obama did do, I'm afraid we must always approach Obama from the point of view of treachery. Treachery. And that means we've got to interpret some of these things that may sound good on their own, right, taken discreetly, in the context of some greater design of treachery. So Obama, naturally, the general approach is to use the demagogy of climate change and the demagogy of gun control as ploys, as a smokescreen to cover the other things that he's doing, to cover the fact that he has no recovery program. He has none. He still has none. He had zero about jobs in the State of the Union, and he does not have a general recovery program. Recovery is defined as 30 million new productive jobs at Davis-Bacon union wages. He just doesn't have it. So Obama started off talking about the sequester. Well, you know what the approach here is to the sequester. Stop it. Abort it. Cancel it. Abrogate it. Repeal it. Call it off. Forget about it. In good dialect, let's just not have it. Let's say to the Republicans, guys, you corporate Republicans, and that's still the majority, you 150 votes in the House, you get to keep your defense spending for the moment. We'll deal with that later. We're going to reconvert that, but we're not going to destroy it. We're going to reconvert that for the space program, energy production, and high-speed modern transportation, among other things. And we're going to reconvert it so we can use it for things that we don't even know yet. But it's going to be there. It's not going to be destroyed. And that continuity and that labor force, above all, is going to be kept together. So that's what the Republicans would get. And then, of course, on the other side, we don't want to cut WIC, women, infants, children, the high-protein meals for mothers and babies. We don't want to cut the National Institutes for Health. So call this monstrosity off. It's still the bad taste left in our mouths by the Satan sandwich of the weakling Obama in August of 2011, when the Republicans threatened to bankrupt the country. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's the 15th of February. And now let's go through the State of the Union. A couple of preludes on this. We had a Wall Street Democrat, the Congressman Welsh of Vermont, was on television before it even started, saying that he is eager to have Medicare cuts. This allows us to identify the general problem. The deficit psychosis imposed by the Republicans, Obama has embraced this deficit psychosis because, as we know from that infamous meeting with the Washington Post editorial board several days before his 2009 inauguration, Obama always saw it as his true mission to attack and loot and sack and gouge Social Security and, above all, Medicare, but to essentially attack the New Deal and call that hope and change. That's always what he was doing. And now we have the danger that this could occur. Cantor, who is supposedly, he's a long-standing hack. He was there long before there was any Tea Party, but he started calling himself Tea Party, right? He got on the train. He got on the Tea Party train as it was leaving the station. Cantor says before the speech he wants to cooperate with Obama on education reform. Now, anybody who knows Obama and Cantor know what that means. That means union busting. It means the privatization of schools. It means the end of the pledge that we've had in this country since the Northwest Ordinance and since the days of Horace Mann of free, universal, compulsory, quality public education. Without that, you're not going to have a country before too long. But both the elites on both sides want to destroy it. So we need a counter-elite. And naturally, there was some fear before the State of the Union. Would Obama go back to the chained CPI? Will he go back to the chained CPI, right? The thing that makes Social Security and veterans benefits and a whole array of other things, makes them wither on the vine, right? The death of 1,000 cuts, right? Romney would simply abolish them. He'd voucherize them, vaporize them, euthanize the recipients. But with Obama, it's a reform to save the program, except not the recipients. Now, I would say the worst thing with Obama is the continued attack on Medicare. This seems to be his monomania. This has immediate genocidal implications. Let's just look at it. Obama argues towards the beginning. He says a few words about the sequester and why the sequester is not good. And then it seems to imply that the way out of the sequester is a dirty, genocidal deal with the reactionary Republicans and the Wall Street Democrats led by Obama, where they say, we're going to reduce the level of austerity in the Pentagon and in the domestic discretionary realm, but we're going to gouge more out of Medicare. So he says, if the cost, this is Obama now, if the costs of Medicare keep rising, this already is sophistry. Medicare costs are not rising that much. Medicare costs have begun to level off. They're actually almost flat for the last couple of years. And so this whole demagogy, right? The demagogy on the Republican side is the deficit is out of control. Well, the deficit is falling, whatever else you want to say about it. And Obama, the Medicare costs are going through the roof. No, they're not. Both are big lies. But this is your Washington elite, your Democrat, Republican, party-crat elite. And they're, Siamese twins in many ways. Obama says then, if Medicare costs continue to rise, that will crowd out all other future investments. So the idea is then to say, let's play the people who want, infrastructure improvement and scientific research and anything else against the oldies who want to keep their Medicare. Now, that's a Hobson's choice, right? That's divide and conquer. That's clever, right? Play the old against the young, play everybody against the old. Typical Obama demagogy, hope and change turns out to be that vicious policy. And there's an answer. There are two answers. One is, if you need money right now, impose a Wall Street sales tax. That's on the paying for Medicare side. You want to pay for Medicare? Wall Street sales tax, 1%, taken care of for the foreseeable future. You can also lift the cap, right? Let the Medicare tax, impose that on all income, the Social Security one in particular on all income. And on the other hand, let Medicare Part D haggle with the prescription drug companies. And on the other side, if you want to have money for those investments, make the Fed cough them up. What's the point of the Fed? Does it just sit there? Is it the Department of Zombie Bank Maintenance? The Department of Too Big to Fail? Is that all it is? Or does it have a responsibility to the broader U.S. economy? Well, we say it does, and it's time to start nationalizing the Fed on the installment plan, right? Maybe you can't nationalize all of it. Let's just nationalize a window, the infrastructure window, the New York, New Jersey, Superstorm Sandy, and Nemo rebuilding windows, right, with several trillion. And really, it should be a nationwide infrastructure window with, if you're going to address, what some engineering associations have called the infrastructure deficit, you immediately get to the 3 to 4 trillion area. So we want to have multi-trillion-dollar tranches, terra tranches of century bonds with 0% coupon, and you have the resources because, remember, money is a fiction. What you're really talking about is labor and factories. Do you have them? Yes, we still do. So we better mobilize them and start building and producing in that way. Now, here's the heart of Obama's position. He says that he is offering additional cuts to Medicare to reach the level demanded by the austerity ghouls of the Bowles-Simpson Commission, right? The Cat Food Commission or Kill Granny Commission, whatever you want to call it. This is absolutely horrendous. Remember, Obama has already gouged $700 billion from Medicare. And now, if he wants to meet the Bowles-Simpson BS Kill Granny targets, then he's going to have to gouge another 400 to 500 billion. So let's take the upper limit because that's where Obama is going to tend. It's 1.2 trillion taken out of Medicare. Now, Obama would then argue, oh, don't worry, none of that is coming from the individual benefit. In other words, you'll still get your benefit up to a point. But remember, if there's no hospital, if there's no lab, if there's no physical therapy, if there are none of these things, your theoretical benefit becomes just that. What if more and more doctors, as I think is already happening, having to drop out of Medicare because of the constant gouging on the benefit? That's a way to destroy the system behind people's backs. The oldies are not going to notice as this occurs. So that's a huge cut. Now, Obama would also say, oh, I'm only taking away the handouts, the corporate welfare that Bush built in to Medicare Part D when he enacted it. All right, fine. I'm sure there's quite a bit of that, but not 1.2 trillion. And we know that there are a lot of smaller labs, a lot of smaller medical practices, smaller hospitals, places like this, that are going to be wiped out. And this is simply criminal. And this is the essence of Obama. So we have to fight on this front. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the continuation of our February 15th World Crisis Radio. So Obama promises to match the genocidal recommendations of the Simpson-Bowles, Kill Granny, and Cat Food Commission, and it comes to $1.2 trillion in Medicare cuts over 10 years. Now, I think that is sufficiently draconian to essentially wipe everything out. In other words, that's the framework, right? The framework is killer austerity, exactly what we don't need. And then within that, we have a couple of things. I'll just give you one or two examples. Obama says every child should have access to a quality preschool. Now, that could mean Head Start. I think Head Start is a very good way to go. That's an established program. It's set up. It's got waiting lists. You put more money into it, the people are clamoring to get in. You also have others that have been established by states. I'm sure there's room for all of that. However, the total price tag, as estimated, for setting up a preschool for every child that wants it, at least at a certain level. I'm sure this is not a Cadillac plan, but a certain level of preschool for virtually anybody who wants it and needs it. $10 billion. So what's Obama doing with this? The word is that Obama is going to use that as a bargaining chip. In other words, we're going to get to a point in the negotiations where Obama wants to capitulate with killer cuts, genocidal reductions on Medicare, which have, direct morbidity, mortality conclusions. And he's going to use the $10 billion preschool program as a smokescreen to, it's a shuck, it's a sop thrown to the liberal base as he makes these killer cuts, he's going to say, yeah, it's true. I'm cutting a total of $1.2 trillion out of Medicare. And, people are going to have their lives shortened by this. But look how liberal I am. Look what a leftist I am. I've got this $10 billion program for everybody to get preschool. And that seems to be the entire thing. Now, the question of the minimum wage, I'm all for it. I think that's long overdue. For the minimum wage, he wants to have a $9 minimum wage, and he also says he wants to index the minimum wage. Now, the minimum wage to $9 is great. From $7.25 to $9, that's a good thing. Remember, if you want to restore the buying power of the minimum wage in 1968, you'd have to take it to $11 to $12. My recommendation is take it to $12 immediately, and then a graduated $1 per year after that till you reach $15. At that point, you could begin calling it a semi-living wage. Naturally, from Obama's point of view, the benefit is that he doesn't have to pay for any of that. Because remember, Obama in this speech has said he will never raise the deficit. In other words, he has accepted the straitjacket. In other words, if you have deficit psychosis and cutting psychosis, then you're going to get a straitjacket. And the straitjacket is, of course, you can't raise the deficit. So that's Obama. Now, of course, on climate change, we have this tired old demagogy. He doesn't dare really get into the nuts and bolts of the carbon tax and Waxman-Markey, right, which is the bill I think that he would be going with. Right, this already passed by the Democrats in the House. So here's what we have in general. He's basically saying we're going to have the Medicare recipients pay with their lives in some cases so that we can have money to convoy to Al Gore and his carbon speculators and to the rich elitists who are concerned about this figment of global warming. There is warming, but it's going on other planets too. It's a result of solar activity. There's no real proof that it's connected to carbon. The carbon levels are not what they say, right? These ice samples they use are not the real levels. The carbon levels in the past are higher than they say. The German chemists of the 19th century kept very good carbon level records, so the increase is not what they claim based on this ice sampling. And above all, we have this thing called the medieval warm period, when you could be growing grapes and wine in places like Vineland, Newfoundland, or someplace like this, and England and generally in Northern Europe. So the notion that some Malthusian tax is necessary because of increased or changing solar activity, absolute insanity. It shows the corruption of science across the globe. So Obama's argument is you should be glad to go into that night of oblivion and extinction, you old people, because we're going to be using that money to line the pockets of Al Gore and his fellow speculators and these people at Solyndra. In other words, these charlatans with windmills and solar cells. It has not changed since Carter. These are not economical. They cannot survive without immense subsidies, and therefore this is the future. I forgot to mention on the minimum wage, when he says the minimum wage should be indexed, right? The answer there is also, let's hope he's not using the chain CPI, because then he'll be chiseling that too. So Obama says he wants to close tax loopholes, and he's going to be forced to use executive orders. Now, you noticed he threatens to use executive orders on this global warming stuff, and we know what this means. The Environmental Protection Agency wants to declare carbon a pollutant and then regulate carbon. This would then lead to a constitutional crisis. And this, I don't know what Obama thinks, but this is not the mandate, right? People voted for Obama because they wanted to be protected from the rapacity of the hedge fund hyena and plutocrat and Romney, right, who was attacking the 47%. So Obama thinks now he's got a mandate to at least have this demagoguery on global warming. He probably thinks he can't get it through, but he's going to use political capital even as he stabs you in the back on these other issues. So you want to close loopholes, Obama? Well, the biggest loophole is that the biggest flow of money isn't taxed, and it's called Wall Street, and it's called the Chicago derivatives futures markets. And the 1% tax there is the biggest loophole because, remember, most of the banks in Wall Street not only pay nothing on their trading, but they pay 0 or less than 3 or 4% corporate income tax. So they're getting the free ride. And this is the biggest concentration of so-called wealth, paper wealth or electronic wealth anywhere in the United States. The other thing is that Obama needs to do things without reference to Congress. Well, there's one way, which is perfectly legal and will not cause a constitutional crisis, is you call Helicopter Ben Bernanke on the phone and you say, Ben, we're going to open the national infrastructure window. We're going to have multi-trillion-dollar terror tranches of century bonds at 0%. You're going to buy the bonds issued by states, counties, cities, authorities, and so forth. We're going to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States, and you are going to provide the liquidity. Your job is no longer simply zombie banks and too big to fail, but it's Main Street and the rest of us. So there's the solution to Obama. The problem is this is exactly what Obama is mobilized to prevent. So there's our problem in a nutshell. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, the 15th of February, in our second hour. Now, let's just have a couple of more notes on this Obama State of the Union. Again, it's a tissue of small-bore things designed to obscure and facilitate the main thing, which is, I think, the attack on Medicare and, indeed, Medicaid, which is included in this. In other words, he says he wants to change the method of payment. In other words, to go from fee-for-service to some nebulous concept that nobody can understand. No. The answer is no. And all we can hope for here, the only thing saving us are these reactionaries and the Tea Party extremists. So I wish them, good hunting when it comes to trying to stop that stuff. And indeed, the same thing goes for this climate change business. He actually says he wants the McCain-Lieberman bill, not Waxman-Markey. Well, these are all totally unacceptable. The other thing, of course, is he gloats that al-Qaeda is the shadow of its former self. No, al-Qaeda is now in control of Libya and northern Syria, unless something changes. So I would say that, and of course, then the gun demagoguery, the crescendo, the peroration at the end that we deserve a vote on these bills. Fine, yes, go ahead and vote on them. But I urge everybody, don't get involved. Don't waste your energy on this stuff. This is an absolute exercise in futility. Now, a couple of comments on the two responses, right? The fact that the Republicans have a double response indicates how split they are, I guess, or really it's personalities. But that also shows that the party structure is weakened. So we've got the reactionary Rubio, and then what? The super reactionary Rand Paul. Rubio starts off. Rubio attacks the stagnant societies, and he wants you to pay attention to his compelling biography. Well, we don't care about your biography. We don't care that you had $100,000 in student debt. You're coming to strip us of our economic rights. That's what we care about. And he's a clever salesman. Interestingly, the contradiction is he says, I benefited. I went to school on federal student loans. My mother and my father have benefited from Medicare. but not you. Government can't help you, even though it obviously helped me, my mother, and my father. And he says he's doing this not for the rich, but for his neighbors. Well, his neighbors are the rich, as somebody then found out. Rubio also pushes the discredited theory that the crash of 2008 was caused by federal efforts to promote home ownership in the subprime area, right? Home ownership was something that Mad Dog Bush the Younger ran on in 2004 successfully. No, the depression comes from deregulation, the deregulation of zombie banks, the end of Glass-Steagall, the beginning of interstate banking, and above all, the deregulation of derivatives. That's where it came from. And you want privatization, too. Fannie Mae would not have been doing those things with speculation if they hadn't been privatized. So, basically, the Rubio response, Rubio is a sanctimonious hypocrite, as people can see. He really parrots the litany. In other words, this is the stupid, dumb, Republican, cliched, Chamber of Commerce, businessman kind of really dumb. It's dumb. It's not Austrianism. It's not even Chicagoism. It's a dumbed down soup made out of both of those. But then we get little Rand Paul. Little Rand Paul goes even more extreme reactionary. Right? He's certainly verging on fascist economics. That's for sure. Rand Paul wants $4 trillion in cuts. He says the sequester is good, but it's not enough. I want $4 trillion in cuts. And he repeats pretty much what Ron Paul had promised in that Restore America budget. In this case, he says, balance the budget in 5 years. Well, part of the Ron Paul balanced the budget in 4 years, one presidential term, was to cut food stamps by 63%. So to take the average payment of food stamps for 50 million people down from $1.50 to about 50 cents. And that's what he's offering. So this is the Tea Party. Of course, they're both from the Tea Party, right? Both of them. Rubio is Rubio's moderate Tea Party, and Rand Paul is extreme Tea Party. These are both two no-talent individuals with no achievements running for president on the basis of absolutely nothing. And if you can imagine a choice between Hillary Clinton and one of those two creeps, then that is the horror that awaits you unless you begin organizing now. And the way to begin organizing now is around issues like the issues I'm telling you about, the Wall Street sales tax and so forth, right? And also spreading this idea that the Fed has a role in getting us out of this. Let me also say something. Ted Cruz, who appears in a lot of these post-game shows, this is another unctuous con artist. This is another snake oil salesman, sanctimonious hypocrite. He does remind you of Senator Joe McCarthy. He is a McCarthyite. He is scurrilous. He is, in some ways, worse culturally, humanly than many of these others. So anyway, that's the U.S. situation. So get the Wall Street sales tax going. Now we want to talk about the situation with the Vatican. Let me say, I have a background, I guess, as a Vatican reporter. I covered the year of three popes, 1978. I was in St. Peter's Square the night that Wojtyła, John Paul II, came out, and I've kept in touch with this over the years, especially in these moments of the conclave when the inner workings of the institution are displayed more clearly so that you can see them. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. It's the 15th of February. Just a couple of other notes on this State of the Union. We got Rubio as the mainline Republican response. Now, Rubio wants to tell you about his whole story. We're not interested in your story. We're concerned about our future, not your biography. Rubio starts off by attacking stagnant societies. Well, the United States has now got less social mobility than any country in Western Europe, except the British. The British still take the cake in terms of social hierarchy and stratification. But the U.S. is worse than anybody in Europe. So who are you kidding? Then we get the litany of schlock economics, right? The typical Republican cliches, the Calvin Coolidge truisms, naturally, the Chamber of Commerce kinds of cracker barrel, pseudo economics. He also pushes the theory that government caused the 2008 economic crisis by promoting home ownership and subprime housing among people who are relatively low income, and that caused a worldwide depression. This is just a bad joke. This is just laughable. The depression comes from deregulation more than anything else. The deregulation of the banking system through the ending of Glass-Steagall, deregulation of the banking system through the legalization of wild interstate banking, the deregulation of derivatives, most of all, the repeal of the Commodity Exchange Act of 1936, and don't forget privatization. The privatization of Fannie Mae made all of that possible. So, again, this is a discredited fairy tale. He's running for president. He's pandering to the Tea Party. He's repeating this litany. He also is going to tell us about the moral crisis facing society. This could be Franco. This could be Pétain. This could be Fulgencio Batista. So that's Rubio. Little Rand Paul, worse than Obama, worse even than Rubio. He wants $4 trillion in immediate cuts. He wants a sequester of $4 trillion. So he's saying that there's not enough genocidal austerity, not enough killer cuts in anybody else, and anything else is big government. So Rand Paul says he can balance the budget in 5 years. I wonder how. Ron Paul never talked about that until he got specific with the Restore America plan of October 2011, where he called for the cutting of food stamps by 63%, meaning that your food stamp benefit for 50 million of your fellow American citizens would go from $1.50 per meal, which is regal and opulent and lordly and excessive, to 50 cents per meal, which means pellagra, scurvy, rickets, and all the rest. So that's the story of these guys. Ted Cruz also deserves special mention, right? A sanctimonious hypocrite, very much in the tradition of the scoundrel Senator Joe McCarthy, right? In the baiting of Hegel. So there we go. Now let's go to Rome and take a look at the crisis in the Vatican. I want to do this because you are, of course, dealing with one of the largest institutions in world history, right? There are now 1.2 billion Catholics. It's by far the largest part of Christianity, and it's probably larger than any other faith, although it's hard to know the exact numbers. And of course, it is one of the oldest in terms of Europe and similar areas, the Western Hemisphere. It is the oldest, but there may be others that are older. We don't need to get into that. But if we combine the largest and one of the largest and one of the oldest, we get something that can be used as a barometer also for the state of the world. In other words, it's a worldwide institution, and the effects coming up from individual places, right, be it Rio de Janeiro or Milan or Tokyo, this comes more or less directly in the sense that it's not filtered through governments and diplomats. In other words, it's several layers closer to the grassroots around the world and, to people, say, in Africa than other institutions. So let's look at this. Now, when Ratzinger became Pope, he took this name, Benedict XVI. Why Benedict XVI? There was, we think, symbolism involved. Benedict XV had been the Pope during World War I, and his big task was to stop the war from breaking out, which he tried very hard to do, and to end it, to try to get it mediated. And in this, the British considered him an agent of the Central Powers. He was considered an agent of Germany, although he was simply doing his job as Pope, trying to end this horrendous imperialist war, right? The biggest catastrophic turning point, because it leads immediately to World War II and what have you. So Benedict XVI, how's he doing? He was elected in 2005 in the middle of Bush's Iraq war, and he has had very little effect. Generally speaking, his profile is one of weakness, impotence. He's not effective. He doesn't have the energy, never had the energy to carry out what he was really supposed to do. And the point is, in Western civilization, the characteristic of it, especially Western Europe, is the emperor or the king, as the case may be, is one person, and the Pope is another. And they're not the same, and they're not institutionally the same, and they fight. From this derives the entire question of branches of government, separation of powers, checks and balances, and the opening of the Western European mind, giving rise to modern science, at least a lot of it, and so forth. So if you're going to be Pope, you better be ready to stand up to the emperor and the empire. And, of course, that's no longer the Holy Roman Empire, which became extinct in the early 1800s after a couple of centuries of weakness. Today it means the Anglo-American. And above all, the U.S., the British. The British have been at war with the Vatican since at least the gunpowder plot of 1605. And they're constantly attacking, right? It never ends. So you've got to understand that atmosphere of hostility, intrigue, spies, and so forth, right, going on in this institution. Now, John Paul II, what was his record? Well, he opposed Bush's first Gulf War, Bush the Elder, and the first Gulf War. I remember we made leaflets of his statement and distributed it to congressmen as they were going to vote for the war. A lot of them were surprised. They didn't know it. The war went through, although not by that much. John Paul II also opposed, I think quite strongly, the Iraq War, and he even stood up to Mad Dog Bush the Younger to his face. But the great failing of John Paul II was his failure to deny the 9/11 story, right, that racist, fascist, militarist myth. So that then left us with Ratzinger, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So if you want to be Pope, you better be ready to fight the empire or the king, some king at some point. But right today, it's the empire. So what's the prelude to resigning? Well, we now find that Ratzinger had a pacemaker. This was removed. This was renewed. The batteries were renewed 3 months ago. He hit his head in Mexico. He has labored very much under the scandals, right? One scandal, the pedophile priests. And in particular, the recent one is Mahoney of Los Angeles, who had been cardinal. He's now out as cardinal. He's cardinal, but he's out as Archbishop of Los Angeles. Had covered up for pedophile priests quite extensively. And Mahoney seems to be defended by a part of the U.S. Catholic bishops. Now, I would say in all of this action, one of the worst actors is always going to be the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference. Parish priests, better. Cardinals, better. Anything better than the U.S. Catholic bishops. So that's one. And then we have the so-called crows, right? You read the Italian papers, I corvi. The crows are the crow is this bird that goes around and picks things up, right, and then takes them. In the case of Vatileaks, it's his butler, right, Paolo Gabriele, allegedly gets these papers and gives them to journalists. So that's going on. So we've got the pedophile priest, we've got the Vatileaks, And at the heart of the WikiLeaks is the IOR, the Institute of Religious Works. It means the Vatican Bank, and the accusations from this character, Gotti Tedeschi, who is very suspicious that this place is corrupt. So naturally, if you're not Anglo-American financed, then you're in danger of being declared corrupt. So the general idea on the surface is that Ratzinger is too weak to deal with these factions. And in one of his farewell statements, he said, the church has been defaced. It's been blighted by divisions and by rivalries. Well, let's just take this WikiLeaks. How did this butler, Paolo Gabriele, get into the papal apartments, right, to do this job? He was recommended by James Harvey, who at that time was the prefect of the papal household. From 1998, he was appointed by Wojtyła, John Paul II, to 2012. So Harvey recommended this butler, who is then allegedly the one, he's been convicted inside the Vatican of stealing these documents. So what does Ratzinger do to Harvey? Well, if you send me a spy, then I'm going to make sure you're fired. But no, he promotes him to cardinal and gives him St. Paul's outside the wall, so he can keep going with his career for quite a bit longer. The general media narrative is that there's the Curia, and they're bad guys, and they're corrupt. And there's Bertone, the Secretary of State, and then there's Bertone's predecessor, Sodano, and we're told that these are bad, and that the goal of Ratzinger had to be to fight them, but he couldn't do it. Now, it's ridiculous, because in terms of the Roman Curia, Ratzinger is as much a fixture of the Roman Curia from the 80s and 90s as either of these guys, right? So I think this makes no sense. Let me rather pose it in these terms. Let's look at it historically. I have two models of papal resignation. The one is the most recent. The most recent takes us back 700 years to 600 years to 1415. Now, this is the time of the Great Schism in the West, and you get an idea of what kind of times we're living in when you have to go back this far. The Great Schism in the West is what? Well, the background is there's the 100 Years' War between England and France. That's destroying Europe. Then you've got the Black Death, which has killed about a third of everybody in Europe, right, in the 1340s and 1350s. And you've got the philosophy of William of Ockham, the nominalist, who's destroying the intellectual life of Europe. So in this format, the papacy is kidnapped by the King of France away from Rome to Avignon, and at a certain point in the 1370s, thereabouts, you get two popes, one in Rome, one in Avignon. And this is as a result of the oligarchy of the cardinals. As the feudal monarchy breaks down, the oligarchs try to assert feudal oligarchy. Not feudal monarchy, but feudal oligarchy. Watch out, because this is very, very timely. So the oligarchy of the cardinals is responsible for this split. Two popes, one Rome, one Avignon. That goes on from the 1370s until 1409 or thereabouts. And then we get an attempt to solve the problem at the Council of Pisa, and then you get three popes. So you've got one in Rome, one in Avignon, and one in Pisa. So, and each of the powers, right, the different countries choose which pope they like, right, with the English and the French obviously being on different popes. So at that point, the Council of Constance is called, right? This is still, not exactly a great thing, but they come up with a solution. They said, we'll make everybody quit. The three popes will have to quit, and we'll appoint a new pope. So the existing Roman pope, Gregory XII, accepts this solution. So they depose what have come to be called the anti-pope in Avignon, deposed the anti-pope in Pisa, and finally one pope in Rome emerges, and that in 1415 gets you out of the great schism of the West. But this is a terrible thing, and it's just 100 years before Luther, so the damage is long term. So that's the previous one. So you could say the resignation of Gregory XII, whatever the theological complications, worked because it ended this tremendous crisis of having three competing popes. You went back to one pope. And since then, right, and it's worth stressing, the 1.2 billion Catholics in the world expect to see one pope, not two, not 1.5 or 1.25 or anything else. So you could say that would be a positive model, right, to put an end to a period of oligarchical supremacy. Because what this was an oligarchy attacking monarchy. And when oligarchy attacks monarchy, it always does so in the name of democracy. So watch out. The other one, though, is Celestine V, and this is the tragic one. And this, I'm afraid, this is the model for what we've got today. We're in the 1290s, and this somewhat naive hermit, again, Ratzinger, an academic, not really the man of the world that you might have thought, not a worldly politician cardinal, right? He had not had a big archdiocese like New York or Paris or Milan or Rio or Buenos Aires. No, he's a scholar. Celestine V. Okay, so Celestine V is surrounded by the Curia of the Caetani family, and in particular, the top representative of the Caetanis is able to scare the hell out of him that he's in danger of eternal damnation because he can't be free from sin. So Celestine quits in 1294, and then we get the Pope Boniface VIII. And Boniface VIII is one of the worst. This guy, if he's known at all today, he's known as the enemy of Dante, the bitter, brutal, implacable enemy of Dante. And he opens a period of 150 years of church crisis. So that may be what we're dealing with now. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Talking about the resignation of Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. So we have the two models, right? One is Gregory XII in 1415. He quits as part of a successful effort to put an end to the Great Schism in the West. And, of course, it's a time of total ideological, political, economic crisis, demographic crisis in Western Europe. Then there's the other one, Celestine V, 1294, forced out by the Caetani family. The Pope then becomes Boniface VIII, who leads the church on this horrendous adventure. He is not powerful enough to stand up to Philip the Fair of France, who kidnaps the Vatican. He beats up Boniface, who then dies, right, soon after, maybe dies of apoplexy, but dies. And that's the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. And this guy, Boniface VIII, is the one who tries repeatedly to get Dante killed. So this is bad news. And after Boniface VIII, you have the Babylonian captivity in Avignon, and then the Great Schism. Right? So for quite a while, there's one pope in Avignon, and then from 1370s to about 1420, there are two popes and then three popes. So I'm afraid that the second one is what we may be dealing with now. Couple of notes. The traditionalists are already saying he can't quit. Dziwisz, the Cardinal of Krakow, who had been the secretary of John Paul II, said, look, you can't come down from the cross. A Roman parish priest said, look, you can't resign as father in your family just because your kids are not doing what you say, if they're disobedient. Think what it means. Up to now, the papacy is forever. Now it's you can quit. You can be forced out, right? If they break your spirit, and I'm not saying who. I don't think it's so much Bertone and others, but I think it's this Anglo-American regime from the outside and from the inside too, with people like this guy Harvey. Then you can, then the next one can be forced out too. In other words, you go from being what they would call a sacral monarch to being a kind of an administrator, right? And if your results next year are not good, you can be forced to quit. It's a tremendous downgrade. Up to now, the Roman popes have always been able to look down on the Queen of England, saying, what are you, right? How long have you been there? But now the tables are turned, right? Because, she's not going to quit, but one pope now has quit. So this is a blow. It is a wound, as one source in the Vatican was quoted in the Corriere della Sera. So what's going to happen with the Pope? Is he going to be photographed? Is he going to give interviews? Is he going to have things to say about current affairs? Is he going to stay in the Vatican, in this convent, or is he going to go to Castel Gandolfo? What's this going to be? Maybe the next Pope, right, once he's elected by the conclave starts on the 15th of March. What if the next Pope says, I don't want you here, go to Castel Gandolfo, or better yet, get out of Italy, go someplace, into the mountains of Bavaria, where you came from. You just can't tell. So there were already traditionalists who are going to say, he can't do it. It's not acceptable, right? Once you're Pope until you die. The Holy Spirit did this. So you get the idea. I think behind this, we can also say the ideological crisis, the exhaustion of Europe. 30 years ago in Europe, you used to have Catholics. These are now hard to find. You used to have nationalists, right? People like General de Gaulle, hard to find. You used to have communists, socialists, trade unionists who really believed in their cause. This has also now been diluted. So what's left seems to be xenophobia and resentment. In other words, the big energy in Europe is people like the UK Independence Party who don't like foreigners, or the Le Pen movement of France who don't like foreigners, or the Northern League of Italy who don't like foreigners. And in Germany, it's not quite so developed, but it may be. Or qualunquismo, right? The so-called libertarianism, what have you. Now, my recommendation to this is the following. Do not accept the standard version, right? The standard version is you now have people coming forward and saying, we're the traditionalists. We want the church to fight the modern world. We want the church to fight modernity. And they say we have to hang on to our dogma and our credenda, and we got to make sure everything stays the way it was under Pius IX and Pius X, right? Pius IX had his syllabus of errors, why the modern world is bad, and Pius X, I'm afraid, was also a rather benighted fellow. On the other hand, you've got the liberals, right? They would have been led by Cardinal Martini, Carlo Maria Martini of Milan, the Jesuit cardinal of Milan. He would have been leading the reformers. But the reformers, what do they stand for? They say multiculturalism, politically correct, right, according to Anglo-Saxon criteria, identity politics, right? De-emphasize the doctrine and go for the psychological needs of the faithful and so forth. So this is obviously not a choice. Now, I would submit that the answer is there within the Vatican tradition, and it is charity. Right? We are told that there's faith, hope, and charity, and the greatest is charity. Look at the works of Professor John Bossy, and you will see that the Church of the Middle Ages, up until the dark day of the Protestant Reformation in 1517, Catholicism was a religion of charity. 50 years ago, we had the beginning of Vatican II, and that reminds us of the tradition coming into the present time. I wanted to read you, and we'll probably get to this next time, some quotes from Pius XI in 1931. Pius XI was out there attacking the Treaty of Versailles, but he was attacking imperialism. He was out there attacking the imperialism of money and the tyranny of unbridled liberalism. That was Pius XI. attacking finance capital. But the one that perhaps more recently, we just had the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Vatican II Council. Paul VI. My submission is that the method of Paul VI Montini is the way out of this crisis. And you can find it above all in the encyclical Populorum Progressio. And it says, peace and development. And indeed, development is the new name for peace. The content of a peaceful world is a world of universal economic development, focusing on the third world, the underdeveloped sector, the excluded countries, and to mobilize for this purpose. Now, I would say the way out is not to maintain the rigidity of dogma, and it's not to throw it all out the window and go for the carnival of multiculturalism and political correctness, but it is to emphasize the hope and the charity of the social gospel, in effect, but on a worldwide basis. I would say you look at something like the community of St. Egidio, St. Giles. What do? They're concerned about the poor where they are. They're concerned about the welfare of people in Africa, above all, AIDS in Africa, child poverty in Africa. And they've also done things to mediate peace. So I think that's the way to go. Reassert your religion of charity. Don't worry so much about the dogma. Don't go with this Franco-Pétain, Salazar, Pinochet policy about, stressing a moral crisis or individual sexual morality. Couple of other, we'll talk about these in the future. Beware of the reformers, they're oligarchs. Watch out for Anglophone Africans. We don't need any Anglophone Africans. An Italian from Argentina is better than a German from Brazil. Those are my recommendations. Well, soon we'll have the odds, right, from the London equivalent of Jimmy the Greek. We'll get that entire thing. But the tradition is there. It's there in Wojtyła, right? Laborum exercens centesimus annus. You get the idea. Reemphasize that. That leads you out of the crisis and lets you become a positive feature of the life of the modern world. That's next week on World Crisis Radio.